So hi, I'm Sarah. I am the one of the education volunteers at Marine Mammals of Maine. So my main role with the organization is to visit folks like you and different libraries and schools and community programs and talk a little bit about the work that we do. So I'm gonna be speaking about our work for probably about 40 minutes. I'm really happy to be interrupted with questions. If there's anything you want me to talk more about as we're going along, feel free to put that in the chat and I'll be able to see those notifications even when my screen is being shared. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So I'm going to share my screen and get this going. So just a little bit of history of Marine Mammals of Maine. We've actually only been in existence for about 10 years. We're a fairly new organization. We started back in 2012, and at that time, we didn't really even have our own rehab facility. We were bringing all of the patients that we picked up had to be transported to the University of New England. They had a rehab facility down in Biddeford, and so we were transporting animals to them. And what happened a couple years later in 2014 was that center at University of New England shut down pretty abruptly, and we weren't able to transport seals there anymore. So we would have to pick up any stranded or sick or injured seals that we picked up and transport them all the way down to Massachusetts. So that's a pretty long journey for a sick or injured seal, and we were finding that unfortunately a lot of them were not surviving that journey because they were just too stressed out and in pretty tough shape when we were picking them up from the beaches. So at that point we got a couple of licenses from the Fish and Wildlife Service to be able to keep seals at a facility we developed for 3 days. And so in that 3-day triage period, we would let them rest, give them fluids, and make sure they were in a little bit better condition. And then we would transport them down to Massachusetts. So we were finding after that after that 3-day rest period, we were getting 100% survival rate of seals that were surviving the trip down to Massachusetts. So that was sort of our first step. And since then, we've been growing more and more in the ability to care for seals at our facility until now we're at the point where we can care for up to 8 seals at a time for as long as they need it. So that can be anywhere from a couple weeks if they just come in with a small injury or a mild illness, all the way up to, we've had seals in our facility for 7 months before, seals that were born prematurely and needed a lot more intensive care before they were ready to be released. So the work that we do is really divided into 4 major areas. The top 2 are the most take the most kind of time and effort from us. So response, anytime that a seal is reported to our hotline, which is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we go out to where that reported location is and assess the seal's situation. So that includes seeing how they look in terms of their overall health, if they have any injuries that we can see, or if they are a baby seal, if they look young enough that they should still be with their mom. And then we would wait to see if the mom comes back after she's finished hunting. So we do a lot of response, and then any seals that we determine do need our care, either because of maternal abandonment or because of an injury or an illness, we bring back to our facility. And again, we're able to care for those animals in our facility for as long as they need it, between a couple weeks all the way up to many months. We also do a lot of research. We take a lot of biological samples from the animals that we care for, and even just a lot of kind of health observations and general condition observations. And we send those along to lots of different research organizations to kind of contribute to their body of knowledge about the population of seals in Maine and in New England. And then finally, education. We visit libraries, we visit schools, we visit community groups, and talk to people about the work that we do, and make sure that folks know how they can help out the marine mammals that we have here in our state. We cover about 2,500 miles of the Maine coastline, everywhere from the Kittery down in the southern border, all the way up to Rockland. So we will respond to any reported seal stranding in that area. And then anywhere north of Rockland, there's an organization out of Bar Harbor called Allied Whale, and that organization will respond to anything north of Rockland. But they, just like we were in our situation a couple years ago where we didn't have our own rehab facility, Allied Whale does not have their own rehab facility up there in Bar Harbor. So anything they respond to north of Rockland, they transport down to us for care. So I want to talk a little bit about what kinds of animals we usually respond to and care for. So the vast majority of our responses are seals. And so the scientific name that we use to refer to for seals is pinnipeds. So the pinnid part, that P-I-N-N-I, means flipper. And then the ped part means feet. So if we put pinnipeds together, it means flipper feet. And that really refers to both their front and their back extremities, where they're much more paddle or flipper shaped to help them move through the water. So they are much more adapted to being able to move through the water rather than being able to move very well on land. So even though they do go back and forth between water and land all the time and are very healthy when they're resting up out of the water, they move much better in the water than they're able to on land because of those flipper feet. So we have 4 species of seals that we will see here in Maine. 2 of them we see in the wintertime, and then 2 of them we'll see all year round. So in the winter, one of the seal species that we see here is the harp seal. So these are the ones that you'll typically see, you know, the really cute little pictures of like a white baby seal in the Arctic, like sitting on the ice floe with its little black nose. Those are baby harp seals. And so we here in Maine get cold enough in the wintertime that harp seals can migrate down and give birth here in Maine. Most of the time for the rest of the year, other than winter, it's actually too warm down here for them. And so that's the only time they come down here is in the wintertime. These ones, because they're born in the winter, and because they live in an environment where most of the time it's snowy, the babies are completely white, and that helps them to camouflage in the background when they're in their snowy environment. And then as they grow older, they're called harp seals because adults develop a black harp shape on their back. So it's like a black marking on the back that's in the shape of a harp. So this seal here, we can tell that it's a juvenile because it's not purely white still, but it doesn't have that fully developed black mark on its back yet. The other one that we see in the wintertime is called the hooded seal. And so they're called the hooded seal because of that picture you can see over there on the right. The males of the hooded seal have like a big bulb inside their nose, and most of the time it's deflated, but when they want to impress a female hooded seal, they'll take a big breath and like blow that bulb up out of their nose like a balloon. And so we might think it looks a little funny, but if you're a female hooded seal, that looks really great. And so that's kind of like their mating display. So those hooded seals also are normally Arctic species, but in the wintertime they can come down as far south as Maine, and so we see them here in the wintertime sometimes. The ones that we see year round are ones you might be a little bit more familiar with, ones you might have seen yourself around Maine. One of them is the gray seal. We see these all over Maine, but I tend to see them more up the farther north we go. I see them a lot like around the mid-coast. These ones, I actually see them almost every time. Like if you take the ferry out to Monhegan Island, they're always kind of hanging around out there. So gray seals are really similar to our other year-round species that I'll talk about in a moment, the harbor seals, but they're a little bit bigger overall. So they have a little bit larger bodies. And then when they turn in profile, they're pretty easy to tell apart from a harbor seal because the gray seals have a much more elongated snout. Their snout is almost a little bit more like horsey, you know, they have that really elongated nose. So they're fairly easy to tell apart from the harbor seals once you kind of know to look for their profile and that long snout. Otherwise, they can look pretty similar. And these ones we actually have to be extra careful with. Just the babies tend to be pretty feisty. Like they'll bite much more easily than other species babies do. They're very defensive. So we always be careful because, you know, any animal that feels defensive will potentially bite but the gray seals we have to be like extra careful with. And then the most common species in Maine by far, and another one that we see year round, is the harbor seal. So this is sort of the, if you think of a seal you might find on the coast of Maine, you're probably imagining a harbor seal. These ones, again, are fairly similar in their adult markings and coloration to a gray seal, but they tend to be overall a little bit smaller, and their snouts are much more stubby, so they don't have that really elongated snout like a gray seal does. Like I said, they're the most common ones that we see in Maine, and they tend to keep us pretty busy in May and June, because that is when all the babies are born. So that's what we call it, their pupping season, when all the seal pups are born. So you'll see this one actually is a very new baby. Its little bit of umbilical cord is still attached there, but we can tell that it's a healthy baby and not premature, because any babies that are born premature still have an almost yellowish white color coat, whereas a baby born at full term has that really light gray coat that you associate with a seal. So it's young, it still has a little bit of umbilical cord attached, but it's healthy. So they have right now, I think their population numbers in the state of Maine are somewhere between like 30,000 and 35,000. So we have a pretty healthy population of harbor seals. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the adaptations that you see in seals that help them to live in their environment, and also then kind of translate into how we have to care for them. So a couple things that you can see right off the bat in this picture, a lot of the adaptations that animals have to help them with their environment are visible kind of on their face area, because that's where a good chunk of our sensory organs are. We have our eyes, we have our mouth, we have our nose right up there on our faces. And so we can tell a lot about an animal from its sensory organs. So the first thing that we can see is that seals have these really huge black eyes. And so those big black eyes really help it to gather as much light as possible when it's underwater. So when you're underwater, you go down and down a little bit deeper underwater, it very quickly gets pretty dark in terms of the amount of light available. So to be able to see pretty well, they need to have these like really big eyes and really dark colored eyes that just really help gather in as much light as possible. Another thing that we can tell from this picture that's pretty easy to see is this is a very young baby seal, probably only a couple of weeks old. And we can actually see how thin it still is. Its body kind of just goes straight back in almost straight lines, whereas a more adult seal, when it has its full layer of blubber, is a little bit more of like a football shape, right? It has like kind of bulges out and then goes back in. They have to have a pretty good healthy layer of blubber to help them keep warm in the cold water. And so when babies are born, they don't have this thick blubber layer built up yet. They have to spend a lot of time drinking their mom's milk, which is very rich in fat, that helps them to build up that fat layer. So until they have that, they really can't spend that much time in the water, or else they'll get too cold and go hypothermic. So those baby seals, when they're in our facility, we have to give them only very short supervised swim time. We want to give them some time in the water so that they're learning how to move around in the water, learning how to swim, but they can't really stay in there that long or else they'll get too cold. And then what that means for them in the wild also is that, their mother might have to go off to hunt fish for 3 or 4 hours at a time. The baby would never survive 3 or 4 hours in that cold water, especially how cold it is early in the spring. And so what she has to do is leave her baby up on the beach on its own and go off and do her hunting and then come back and collect the baby. So what we see very often then in the springtime are baby seals left on the beach on their own. And so that we have to then watch and kind of determine, is this a case where the mother's just off hunting and she's going to come back? Or is this a case where it's a maternal abandonment case where the mother's not going to come back? And unfortunately, that also leaves the baby seals open to human interactions. People see a baby seal on the beach and think, oh, it's in trouble and they have to help it, or they just want to kind of come up close for a better look. And so that's not necessarily, that's going to be something that stresses it out quite a lot, and also might cause the mother to not come back for it. And that's really all because the baby seal hasn't built up enough blubber yet to be in the water as much as its mom has to be in the water to hunt. A couple of other adaptations that are really easily visible in this picture. One has to do with the seal's nose. So you'll notice that right now the seal's nostrils are closed. So its nostrils are just kind of very closed slits. Unlike us, where our nostrils are open by default, and actually we can't even really close them that well. You can't like really flex your nose and close your nostrils. A seal's nostrils are closed by default, and so they don't have to be flexing any muscles to keep them closed. Instead, they actually have to flex their facial muscles to open those nostrils and take a breath when they're up out of the water. And so the reason for that is when they're spending a lot of time underwater hunting, they don't want any water being able to get in their nose, but they also don't want to have to be using energy constantly flexing their muscles to keep those nostrils closed. So they're closed by default and they have to flex them on purpose to open them. And then seals, we can see very well in this picture, also have very, very sensitive whiskers. So similar to, you know, your cat has whiskers, a lot of other mammals have these whiskers, and they serve the same function in a seal in the sense that they pass sensory information to the seal about what's going on around it. The way these guys actually use the whiskers is fascinating. So when they're hunting underwater, and again, we know that it can often be a very low light environment, and it could be, the water can be murky with, you know, sediment all churned up and stuff. And so the seals, actually, the whiskers are able to sense if there are fish moving nearby. So if there's a fish moving through the water, as that fish swims, it's displacing water with its body. And just that small amount of water movement, the seal's whiskers are sensitive enough to be able to pick that up. They're about 10 times more sensitive than a cat's whiskers, which is kind of amazing. So they are able to use those whiskers as like supplementary sensory information to help them hunt when the light conditions aren't very good. So we've talked a lot about seals and kind of the specific needs that they have. I do want to talk a little bit just for a moment about cetaceans. Those are the whales and dolphins and porpoises. Because we are Marine Mammals of Maine, we help all marine mammals, including the cetaceans, sorry. And we just tend to get way fewer calls about cetaceans than we do about seals. We get somewhere on the order of like 400 to 500 calls per year about seals, and maybe 10 per year about cetaceans. Our issue when it comes to trying to help out any stranded whales, dolphins, or porpoises is that usually by the time they're stranded, there's very little that can be done to help them. So seals, you know, it's part of their natural behavior to be up out of the water. They come up out of the water to rest, to lay in the sun and get warm. You know, it's a normal thing for a seal to be resting up out of the water. Cetaceans, it is not part of their normal behavior at all to be up out of the water. They're usually, you know, fully aquatic in the water all of the time. So if a cetacean ends up stranded or on the beach, it's usually because they're very injured or very ill, or you know, if they get lost in some way, but that usually has to do with some kind of infection or illness. So usually by the time that we arrive at the stranding of a cetacean, there's not a whole lot that we can do for it. We were able to rescue one harbor porpoise from Damariscotta back in, I think, 2014. It's this guy on the lower left here. We ended up naming him Noodles because he had pneumonia. And so because he wasn't able to get enough air in his lungs, he wasn't able to float. So they rigged up like a little floaty system for him with pool noodles while he was recovering. And so his name was Noodles, and he fully recovered, and we released him back, you know, once he was fully healthy. So that's a success story for that little porpoise. But for the most part, when we do get a call about a cetacean, there's really not a whole lot that we can do. One of the major issues that cetaceans have when they strand is just because their bodies are so heavy. They're usually, you know, when they're in the water, they have the buoyancy of the water kind of helping them to hold their body up. When they're on land, they're kind of subject to the full force of gravity, and just the weight of their body kind of pushing down on all of their internal organs just does a lot of internal damage to them. So it's because they're so large and so heavy, and their bodies are really made to be supported by the water. So I want to talk a little bit about what the best course of action is to do if you find a stranded seal. So like I said before, a lot of the issues that seals have when they're, you know, if it's just a baby seal resting up on the beach, or if it does happen to be ill or injured, is that the people who come across that seal often don't know what the best course of action is. And in the course of trying to help, they might be doing things that are instead a little bit more harmful. So I just want to kind of go over a few things that are great to do if you happen to see a seal. I know you guys are inland a little bit more, but hopefully you make it out to the coast a few times a year. So when it comes to like minimizing the animal's stress, we definitely want to keep the area as quiet as possible and minimize contact from humans and from any other pets. Seals are kind of high strung actually as animals. They're like really susceptible to stress. And so if you can imagine, you know, if an animal is already sick or injured or really dehydrated, then any kind of additional stress is just going to make its condition worse. So we really want to stay away from the animal, help keep other people away from the animal, and just try to kind of keep the environment as stress-free as possible. We don't need to be returning it to the water, so it's not like a whale or a dolphin or a porpoise where it's in danger if it's up out of the water. Seals come up out of the water on their own for many reasons, like I said, to rest, to keep warm, to lay in the sun and warm up after a lot of time in the cold water. So it's perfectly okay for a seal to be up out of the water. One of the things we really hope is that when folks come to a presentation like this, and you're ever in a position where, you know, you're on the beach and maybe there's a seal, you can tell the folks around you what to do. It's always really helpful to have somebody with that kind of knowledge out there. Keeping people and dogs out of sight of the animal, we talked a lot about before, you know, about the stress and about how they are very prone to stress. So keeping people out of sight, absolutely. And then dogs are a really important case to, if you have a dog, or if somebody else has a dog on the beach, to keep it away from the seal. Dogs and seals are actually closely related enough that they can pass diseases back and forth. And so one of the things we actually saw this summer was that there were a lot of seals that were showing up with avian flu. And then we did see a couple of instances where we think that either a seal got it from a coyote or a coyote got it from a seal when the coyote was like kind of sniffing around the seal on the beach. So we definitely know that dogs and seals can pass diseases back and forth. So that is super important. Again, you don't necessarily need to pour water on the animal, much like that. I think that's the classic thing that folks see, right? If there's like a whale or a dolphin stranded, they'll try to keep the animal cool. That's really not necessary with a seal. They're not really in danger of overheating necessarily when they're up there on the beach. So that's not something that we need to worry about. This one might seem like a no-brainer, but it's really surprising how many people will try to bring the animal some human food to eat. This is not going to be helpful to the seal unless you're eating raw fish, but most likely you're not. So that's, again, not really something that's going to help them. We do love it if you would give us a call when you come across a seal on the beach. Even if it looks perfectly fine, we still like to know about it. It's still really helpful for our data collection. You know, we keep track of reportings, and that helps us to just keep a general idea of the overall population that we see on the coast of Maine. So on the last slide, I have our phone number, and then I also have the website where you can find our phone number as well. So a couple of like just examples of the types of things that tend to happen when people see a seal on the beach that are not super great for the animal. So this top left picture was taken on Old Orchard Beach. It's kind of hard to see in the middle of this cluster of people, but right here, kind of where I'm moving my cursor, you can see like a little black shape in the middle of that cluster of people. That's a baby seal there. And so I mentioned a little bit before that sometimes if the mother seal is off hunting and she's left her baby so that it can stay warm on the beach, if she comes back and sees a whole crowd of people kind of right up around her baby like that, she's going to be too scared to come back up onto the beach and retrieve her baby. So if she comes back and sees this situation, she would unfortunately just leave, and then we would have to take the baby in because it doesn't have its mom around to care for it anymore. So it's really difficult when there's a baby seal on the beach with a ton of people to keep people away. Sometimes we even we'll maybe ask the you know, any local police or something to try to help keep people away until we can get there. But that's kind of the dangers of what we see when a baby seal is up on a crowded beach like that. Unfortunately, like up on the upper right, we see this sometimes. There's, you know, people want to get a picture with the seal, and you know, we get it because they're super cute, but this is going to be a really stressful experience for the animal, because they don't know what our intentions are. We're just something that's bigger than them and is getting all up in their face, and they probably honestly just think we're about to eat them. So it's that ends up being a very stressful situation for it. Down here on the lower left, these well-meaning people picked this animal up and put it on a boogie board, and we're going to take it back out to sea on the boogie board. So again, if a seal is up on the beach, it's probably resting, keeping warm, doesn't need to get moved back into the water. Even a situation like this, so it might be difficult to see because the line is a little bit thin, but this seal here has some fishing line wrapped around it. And even something like this, it's much safer. Seals have very large, very sharp teeth because they're predators. And so if you did try to get up to the seal to help it, you're definitely putting yourself in danger for sure. And then also, you know, if we got a call about a situation like this where the seal had some fishing line wrapped around it, we would, instead of just coming and taking it off right at the beach, we would take this seal back to our facility and instead remove that line in a sterile environment, where we then be able to help, you know, care for any wounds that it might have, give it some antibiotics, and make sure that there's no infection that came along with having that line wrapped around it. So this is what we would usually do if we show up to a seal stranding report. Obviously, if it's visibly very sick or visibly injured, then we just take it in right away. But often what happens is we show up and there's just a perfectly healthy looking baby seal there. And so we'll put up a little sign that tells people the seal is just resting. We're just kind of keeping an eye on it, and we'll keep an eye on it for a while and make sure that the mom comes back to collect that baby seal. If she does, that's great. Situation over, the baby seal is with its mom and everybody's happy. If it's been, you know, 24 hours and the mom hasn't come back for it, that's when we would take it into our facility for care until it's able to be on its own. So there's just kind of a series of pictures here that shows the same seal all the way up from when we have to pick it up from the beach all the way to when we release it. So the first row of pictures up there is a baby seal that we picked up from Popham Beach. And it had to be, you'll notice it's kind of has a little towel wrapped around it. Whenever we are transporting a seal anywhere, in addition to having really sharp teeth, they also have really sharp claws. And so just honestly, more for our protection than anything, we wrap them up in a little towel. You can see there that we just transport them in like a dog carrier, the same kind of carrier that you might use to bring your pet to the vet. And so we bring it back to our facility, care for it for as long as we need to. And I have a little behind the scenes video about that in a moment. And then that same seal on the bottom row of pictures, you can see it's much larger, much rounder, a fully adult seal at this point, and is being released back. We actually do a lot of releases at Popham Beach as well. When possible, we really like to put a tracker tag on the seal. We are only able to do this maybe once or twice a year because the satellite trackers are pretty expensive. A lot of times we're able to get one donated, for example, or you know, if there's one left over from a different research project, they might give it to us. But I really like this because it shows all of the different places that a seal will go just in a short amount of time. So I mentioned that we do a lot of our releases off of Popham Beach. So if you look way down here in the lower left of this picture, this is Popham Beach down here. And then after we release this seal, the first time that the satellite tracker pinged on December 30th, 2020 was right over here. And then the last time it pinged was just about 2 weeks later, January 12th, 2021. And you can see all of the different places that it's been in those 2 weeks. So it went, you know, kind of up around Monhegan, spent a lot of time around Rockland and Thomaston, and kind of spent most of its time up around Vinyl Haven. So all of these different red dots are locations that seal was within that 2 weeks. It's not uncommon for a tracker tag like this to only give us a couple weeks or a month or two's worth of data. They're meant to fall off over time. And so we like to get whatever data we can for them, but we know it's not going to be, permanently affixed. So a little video break. I have another little video to show about, I mentioned a little bit about behind the scenes of an animal being cared for. So I am going to switch over. Okay, so that was just a kind of an example of one of the seals that I think I mentioned a little bit earlier. We had one seal that we had to care for about 7 months because it was born premature. That was that seal. So you could see that its coat was a little bit more of that yellowish white color rather than the gray of a full-term baby seal. So so that seal was with us for about 7 months a couple of years ago. And it's she was very spirited. She never stopped harassing our volunteers for food at all times, and she had a great time kind of constantly begging for food and learning how to swim. But we're really happy that she ended up being a success story because she was with us for quite a lot of time. I have a little bit of information too about we actually have no current patients right now. We just released our last 2 into the wild last week, so I have a little bit of video about that as well. But the 2 that were with us almost all summer were these 2 guys here. So number 64 over on the right was picked up from Georgetown, and that one unfortunately was a case of maternal abandonment. We're not sure exactly what happened, but but he was called in alone, and the mother never came back. So so we brought 64 into our facility for care. And then we also had number 87 with us for most of the summer. Number 87 was picked up from Scarborough. And again, unfortunately, for number 87, this was a case of human interference. So she was up on the beach, and just people, it was in, Scarborough's fairly well populated. A lot of the beaches are pretty popular. So a lot of people walking on the beach just kept kind of going up to her and seeing, checking her out up close. And so we had to take her in for her own safety. But we did just release these two off of Popham Beach last weekend. So I'm going to see if I can pull up. I might have to stop my screen share just for a moment to switch the video that I have. But I have just a little 1-minute video of that release as well. So that was very exciting for us because, like I said, those were our last two animals that we had in our facility to be released. Most of our work is done in the summertime, just because that's, again, when all the babies are born in like around May and June. And then those tend to be the ones that need the most care, either because, like I said, of maternal abandonment or people finding them on the beaches and a little bit of human interference there. But we do care for animals all year round. We get reports of injured or sick stranded seals all year round. It just happens to be that most of our work is with the pups over the summertime. So for now, we do not have any patients, which is how we like it. It means that everybody's out there doing well and healthy. But those two are our last ones that had been with us for most of the summer and just got to go home last weekend. So I will keep this slide up just for a moment, and then I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see me again, and we can do a little Q&A. But we have our website here, just this MMoME.org. And from there, you can find links to our Facebook and Instagram. They do a really great job of updating Facebook and Instagram very frequently with news and information about who's in our facility right now, if we have any patients, how they're doing, what caused them to be brought into us, health checks on the patients, things like that. And then I'm not sure I don't know how it looks for you guys. For me, the little transcription box is blocking the hotline number, but I think maybe if I stop talking for a minute, you'll be able to see that phone number. So our phone number is written along the bottom here. I actually just have that programmed into my cell phone so that if I ever need it, I don't have to be like fumbling around trying to find the cell phone number or the hotline number on the internet. And I have actually had to use it. So I've had to call a seal in from Cape Elizabeth a couple of years ago. So I'll stop talking for a minute, and hopefully that transcription box will go away and you can jot down that phone number. Okay. So I will put that phone number in the chat as well while we're doing a little bit of Q&A, and it's also listed on the website. So I'm going to put the website into the chat, and then I will follow it up with putting the phone number into the chat as well, so you can have access to those. All right, there you go. So what questions can I answer for folks? Please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask, or if you want to type it into the chat, we can do that as well.
I have a question, Sarah. I don't know if other people will have questions, but I was just wondering, and maybe it's a big question, but what effects have you seen from climate change? Like what's changed for you in the seals? You know, what things are you seeing?
That's a really good question. So far, I think probably the biggest is fewer of those Arctic species coming down in the wintertime. Because even just overall, we've been a little bit more mild lately than we have been in the past. Both, summer temperatures being warmer, but also winter temperatures being warmer. And those, we were already kind of on the southern edge, or, the southern end of where those Arctic species could migrate down to, and still have it be cool enough for them. So we're seeing fewer of the Arctic species for sure. I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think we don't fully have a good holistic picture yet of what the Gulf of Maine, the waters of the Gulf of Maine are warming faster than almost any ocean water anywhere. And that has a lot just to do with the way that currents move around in the Gulf of Maine. It has a lot to do with kind of how shallow the Gulf is overall, comparatively speaking. So because the Gulf of Maine is warming fairly quickly, we're seeing different populations or different effects on populations of other ocean animals like lobster, fish, species, things like that. So I think, I don't think it's completely clear yet, but I think it will become clear with more data how the warming temperatures are potentially impacting the seal's preferred prey animals. So some of those other, the fish species that the seals really like. So again, I don't have any definitive answers yet. I think there's more, we need just more years worth of data. But that's something to watch out for as well. And then with the warming too, we've always had sharks in the Gulf of Maine. But similarly, just the warmer the water is, the more hospitable it is for sharks. And so as predators of seals, that's another thing that I think we're having more shark sightings in Maine lately as well. Again, they've always been here, but I think the warmer waters just let them kind of hang out for longer. So that's a potential impact as well. Yeah. Oh, good question, Maria. Yes, seal moms do just give birth to one pup at a time, and just one for the year. So after the pups really only stay with their mom for about 4 weeks. It's surprising. Like usually mammals have their babies in their care for longer, but they just have one pup at a time, and then that's their one pup for the season.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So when the seals get released back in, like, are they, I assume readily accepted? Like what's their like re-entry process like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm really fascinated by like seal social dynamics. They're really interesting because there's not a whole lot of mammals that are like seals, in the sense that when they are out at sea, they're solitary. They're off. They don't hunt in packs like dolphins do, or whales. They're completely doing their own thing when they're out at sea. When they're up on land, they can be in huge like you see these huge piles of seals up, like all just resting on the rocks together, and they're not like fighting at all, right? So they're independent enough to be solitary, but they're also perfectly fine just all piling all together on a beach and like being all over each other. So in terms of they don't really form the really long lasting relationships, so they don't necessarily need to worry about like re-entry into a pack, because it's just all the seals that will be piled up on the beach together are just like whoever happened to be in that area at the time. So they don't really have that sort of thing where there's a pack of seals and they all stick together and then here's this newcomer. They're just all kind of all moving around to different areas and different groups of seals all the time.
That's great. That must make it, more successful for them.
Yes, it does. It actually makes it very easy to release them, no matter how long they've been in our care, because they can just go do their own thing and then just join any random group of seals they find, and it's never a problem. Yeah. Ooh, good question. Natural lifespan of seals. In the wild, it's a little bit less, just because they have to worry about, getting enough food and disease and predation and all that stuff. In the wild, it's maybe 20-ish years. In captivity, like seals at aquariums or something can live more like 30 years. So they're fairly long-lived. Other questions that folks have?
I wonder if you could talk, Sarah, if nobody else has questions. I feel like I'm totally dominating this. But I think it's always interesting, like if there are kids watching, or if there will be kids watching on the recording, like to talk a little bit about how you got into this work, like what your education was and how you came to do this. Because I think this is a really interesting job that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I would be happy to talk about that. So I came to this in a roundabout way. So first of all, I'm a volunteer, so I don't work for Marine Mammals of Maine. They only have a couple of full-time staff, and then all the vast majority of people who do work with Marine Mammals of Maine are volunteers. But I can tell you a little bit about my background and what kind of background you might want to pursue if you are interested in this. So I studied biology in college, and then I actually I started to get a master's degree in marine biology. And while I was doing that master's degree in marine biology, I realized that I didn't like lab work as much, and I wanted to work with people a little bit more. So I left that program and got a science education degree. And then after I got my science education degree, I also decided to go get a library degree. So right now what I do is I'm a librarian during the day, and then I come in and talk to libraries at night about seals. So what that actually did for me is it set me up really well. I have the background knowledge in biology and marine biology to be able to talk about these things, but also in education. So I'm really comfortable talking in front of groups. It's surprisingly hard to get people who like really want to talk about seals, but then are also comfortable kind of speaking in front of groups. So depending on what you want to do kind of within marine conservation or things like that, some kind of a degree in biology is really helpful. If you have a degree in biology or zoology, then you can move on to getting like a certification, and they have whole programs in wild animal rehabilitation. So you can kind of study that. You can get if you're really interested in this area in particular, once you're in college, Marine Mammals of Maine has a lot of summer internships, and so that can help get you some experience. Anytime that you want to get a job in a particular field, it just helps to get as much experience as you can. So you can find other organizations to volunteer with that might do things related to ocean health and marine ecology and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of paths into a project or into a field like this, depending on what you want to do. And I know, for example, no matter what skills or strengths that you have, we obviously, when it comes to an organization like us, we need people who can do the rehabilitation side of it, but we also need people who can do fundraising, and we need people who can come teach like this, right? We need people who are good at teaching. We need people who are just good at organizing things and administration and stuff like that. So really, whatever skills you have and whatever strengths that you have and whatever your interests are, you can usually leverage that into moving into a career that you find really enjoyable and meaningful.
Yeah. Anyone else have questions? I feel like I've monopolized.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to come learn about our work and how you can help seals and other marine mammals in Maine. Please do give our website a visit. Like I said, if nothing else, it's worth it for just linking over to our social media. There's all kinds of cute pictures and videos of the seals in our facility, like all the time. So it's worth it just for that.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This was really interesting.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.